A big 16-year-old girl got sent to live with a mountain man because her dad was mad at her. That's what everyone in town whispered as they watched her leave in a wagon, heading up to the hills. They thought she was gone forever, tossed out, like a broken toy. But up in those mountains, behind a locked door with a fire that always burns, something's waiting. The man who took her isn't who they think he is. And the girl everyone gave up on? She's about to find out a secret nobody's ready for. When the past comes back and the valley gets cold, one big question hangs in the air. Who really got saved that day? And who got judged too fast? Your comments always remind me how stories tie us together, no matter where we're from or what we've been through. If you care about things like respect, bravery, and kindness, you're part of this story too. The hot spring sun baked the dusty streets of Whetstone as Jed Boone's loud voice boomed through the morning. His big hand grabbed Delilah's arm so tight it hurt, pulling her past the hitching posts and water troughs toward the general store. "Time's up!" he shouted, dragging her up the wooden steps. "I'm done carrying this lazy girl." Delilah tripped, her face red with embarrassment as people started to stare. Her plain brown dress was all wrinkled from her dad's rough grip, and bits of her dark hair fell out of her braid. She stared at the worn wooden boards under her feet, trying to shrink away even though she was big. "Listen up!" Jed yelled, to the crowd gathering around. "I'm trading this girl, my own daughter, for a good hunting rifle and 3 bags of flour." His voice was full of disgust. "She's strong enough to work if someone can fix her lazy habits. Too soft for ranch life, too stubborn to learn." The morning got super quiet and it felt heavy. Delilah could hear her own fast breathing and feel everyone's curious and sad looks. She'd known these people her whole life. The bell on the general store jingled as someone stepped out, but she didn't look up. "She's 16 now, and I'm done trying to make her tough," Jed went on, shaking her arm again. "Time she learns what real hard times are." Boots creaked on the wood. A shadow fell over Delilah's face. "I'll take that deal," a calm, steady voice said, strong like a rock. Delilah looked up, surprised. It was Gideon Maddox, the quiet mountain man who only came to town a few times a year for supplies. His beard had gray in it, and his clothes were old but tough. His eyes looked at her, not mean or kind, just sizing her up. "Well now," Jed said, sounding surprised. "Didn't think you'd want her, Maddox. You sure?" I said. "I'll take the deal," Maddox said, his voice steady. "My rifle's in good shape. I'll throw in the flour, too." He pointed to his wagon at the bottom of the steps. Jed let go of Delilah's arm. "Deal," he said, giving her a little push toward Maddox. "She's your problem now." The trade happened, fast like it was nothing. Delilah stood still as Maddox got the rifle and bullets, then carried 3 heavy bags of flour from his wagon to the store's porch. Her dad checked the rifle more carefully than he ever looked at her, testing it and looking through the sight. "Good trade," he said finally. Then he spat in the dust near Delilah's feet. "You'll learn what hard times are up in those mountains, girl. Maybe it'll make you worth something." Without looking back, he walked away, holding the rifle like it was his kid. Delilah watched him go, shaking even though it was warm. The crowd started to leave, but she heard their whispers. "Come on," Maddox said softly. He didn't grab her, just pointed to his wagon. "It's a long ride." Delilah followed him down the steps, her legs wobbly. The wagon was packed with supplies, tools, feed bags, and barrels of lamp oil. Maddox helped her up onto the wooden seat, then pulled a rough wool blanket and half a loaf of bread from a bag. "Might get cold," he said, handing them to her. "Eat if you're hungry." She took them without thinking, holding them tight like a shield. The bread smelled fresh, but her stomach was too nervous to eat. Maddox climbed up next to her and picked up the reins. With a soft click, the horses started moving. The wagon. Wheels bumped over the rough street as they left Whetstone behind. Delilah stared straight ahead, too scared to look back at the only home she'd ever known. The blanket stayed in her lap, even though the afternoon got chilly. Her mind was full of questions she was too afraid to ask. The mountains stood tall. In front of them, their snowy tops bright against the spring sky. Somewhere up there was whatever life Maddox had planned for her. Her dad's last words kept ringing in her head. Real hard time. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and quietly prayed for strength to face whatever was coming. The mountain paths got steeper as the afternoon turned to evening. Delilah's fingers were numb even with the blanket, and her body hurt from sitting on the hard wagon seat for hours. The horse's breath made white clouds as Gideon steered them carefully around sharp turns and rocky spots. Just as the sun disappeared behind the peaks, Gideon stopped the wagon in a small clearing with big pine trees all around. "We'll sleep here tonight," he said, locking the wagon brake. He climbed down and started unhitching the horses like he'd done it 1,000,000 times. Delilah stayed on the seat, watching him feed the horses and gather wood for a fire. The spring night got cold fast, but the fire started to crackle. Gideon looked up at her. "Come down by the fire," he said. "No point freezing up there." Her sore muscles complained as she climbed down carefully. She kept the blanket wrapped tight and sat on a fallen log, far from the fire and Gideon. He didn't seem to care about her being cautious, just kept working quietly. Soon a pot of beans was cooking over the fire, and the smell of coffee filled the clearing. Without saying anything, Gideon put a plate of beans and a cup of coffee on the log next to her, then went back to his spot across the fire. While she ate tiny bites of the warm beans, Gideon gathered pine branches and tied them into a small shelter a few yards from the fire. He put a bedroll inside it, then came back to the fire. "That's for you," he said, seeing her confused look. "For privacy. You sleep there. I'll stay by the fire." Delilah nodded a little, feeling a bit less scared. At least he wasn't, expecting her to stay close to him. They hit the trail again at sunrise, climbing higher into the mountains. The wagon creaked and rocked as Gideon steered it through narrow paths. By mid-morning they turned a corner, and Delilah saw where they were going. A worn-out cabin tucked against a hill with a clear stream nearby. There was a chicken coop and a small goat pen on one side, and a vegetable garden with a rough fence behind it. Gideon helped her down from the wagon and led her to the cabin door. "This is home," he said simply, opening it. Inside, morning. Light came through two small windows, lighting up a simple room. A stone fireplace took up one wall, with a table and chairs nearby. Shelves held cooking tools and supplies. A ladder went up to a loft. "Kitchen's here," Gideon said, pointing around the main room. "Loft up there's where you'll sleep. My room's through that door." He pointed to the only other door in the cabin. "You don't have to cook or clean for me, or do anything for me." Delilah's eyes got wide. She thought she'd been brought here to be a servant, at best. Gideon's face didn't show much, but his voice was serious. "This place is calm," he said. "You need peace, not punishment." That night, Delilah lay in the loft on a comfy straw mattress, warm under a pile of quilts. The fire downstairs crackled softly. Through the tiny window, she saw stars sparkling like diamonds on a black blanket. Tears came, quiet and hot on her cheeks. She wasn't sure if she was crying because her dad rejected her for good or because she felt surprisingly safe here. Maybe both. She fell asleep to the gentle sound of the stream outside. When she woke up, sunlight filled the loft, and the cabin smelled like cornbread and bacon. Delilah stayed still for a moment, soaking in the feeling of being warm, comfy, and, most surprising, still safe. Life at the mountain cabin settled into a nice routine. Every morning, Delilah got up with the sun, put on her old boots, and went to the goat pen. The goats got to know her fast, rubbing their soft heads against the fence when they heard her coming. She liked their happy bleats and the warm feel of their bodies when she milked them. The chicken coop became a daily job, too. Delilah liked collecting eggs, reaching carefully under the warm hens to grab the smooth brown eggs. Sometimes she'd stop to watch the hens peck and scratch in their yard, moving like they had all the time in the world. In the garden, spring was waking up the dirt. Gideon showed her how to dig with a spade, breaking up the hard ground from winter. Her muscles hurt at first but got stronger every day. When she planted her first row of peas, pushing each seed into the soil with care, she saw Gideon nod like he was proud from across the yard. The mountain air felt different from the dusty town below. Up here, the breeze smelled like pine and wild sage. Even the sunlight seemed cleaner, shining through the trees in soft rays. Delilah started breathing deeper, and her shoulders didn't feel so tight anymore. One afternoon, while sweeping the loft floor, Delilah's broom hit something, under an old blanket by the wall. She pulled the blanket back and found a dark wooden trunk with old brass fittings. A big lock kept it shut tight. Her fingers traced the pretty carvings of flowers and vines on the lid. The trunk made her curious, but she put the blanket back. This was Gideon's home, and she didn't want to snoop. That evening, as they sat quietly by the fire, Delilah worked up her nerve. "Mr. Maddox," she said softly, "can I ask about your past? How you ended up living here alone?" Gideon's face froze like a pond in winter. "Some things are better left alone, girl," he said sharply. He stood up fast and walked outside, leaving Delilah by the fire. She didn't ask again, but questions swirled in her head like smoke. Why did he choose to live so alone? What was in that locked trunk? A few days later, the afternoon quiet was broken by the sound of horse hooves. A woman rode into the yard on a strong brown horse, her silver-streaked hair tied back in a braid. Her saddlebags clinked with glass jars. "Miss Josie," Gideon said, coming out of his workshop. "Didn't expect you for another week. Thought I'd bring these dried mint and jams early," the woman said, getting off her horse easily. Her sharp eyes spotted Delilah standing nervously by the cabin door. "Who's this?" Gideon pulled Miss Josie aside, and they talked quietly for a few minutes. Delilah couldn't hear them, but she saw Miss Josie's face soften from worry to understanding. Then Miss Josie came over with a warm smile. "Come help me unpack these jars, kid," she said, leading Delilah to the horse's saddlebags. As they worked, Miss Josie spoke softly. "I've known Gideon Maddox for 15 years. He's a good guy, even if life's been tough on him. You're safe here, like a spring flower. Don't doubt it." Delilah nodded, feeling something in her chest loosen at the woman's words. That night, after Gideon went to his room, Delilah sat cross-legged in her loft. She pulled out the little notebook and pencil she'd brought from town, one of the few things she still had. By lantern light, she started sketching wildflowers she'd seen by the stream that morning. Her fingers moved confidently, drawing, the soft petals and strong stems. Drawing was her secret comfort, something her dad always called silly. But here in the quiet loft, with only crickets and a far-off night bird for company, she felt free to draw. The flowers came alive on the page, as real as the mysteries in her new home. A spring storm rolled in fast, with dark clouds piling up over the mountains like a heavy blanket. Thunder boomed and rain pounded the cabin roof, keeping Delilah and Gideon inside. The small space might have felt weird, but Delilah found a calm routine, even stuck indoors. On the first morning of the storm, Delilah noticed a pile of Gideon's shirts needed fixing. She picked up a worn blue shirt, happy to do something familiar, with a needle and thread. Her dad never let her mend his clothes, saying her stitches weren't good enough, but Gideon nodded gratefully when she offered. As she sewed, the rain tapped the windows, matching the rhythm of her needle. Then Gideon did something surprising. He grabbed an old, dusty leather Bible from a shelf, its pages yellow. He opened it carefully, like it was both special and scary, and started reading out loud. His voice was rough and unsure, not like a preacher's. "Used to know these words better," he mumbled before reading Psalms. Delilah listened as she sewed, noticing his fingers shake a little when he turned the pages. The second day of the storm brought a funny visitor. While Delilah was stirring beans, a loud bang at the door made her jump. A young goat had escaped its shelter and pushed into the cabin, leaving mud everywhere. It stood there, wet and happy with itself. For the first time since coming to the cabin, Delilah laughed, a clear, real laugh that bounced off the walls. Even Gideon's mouth twitched, almost smiling, as they worked together to shoo the goat back outside. When the storm cleared, leaving puddles and new green plants, Gideon started teaching Delilah things she never learned on her dad's ranch. He showed her how to hold an axe to chop kindling, adjusting her hands. "Let the axe do the work," he said, watching her split a piece of pine. "That's it. Don't force it." They got into a rhythm carrying water. Every morning and evening, They'd walk to the creek, each with 2 buckets. Delilah learned to walk smoothly so the water didn't spill, finding balance in the sway. The creek made a happy sound, bubbling over rocks and whispering through reeds. One sunny afternoon, Gideon found Delilah sitting on a warm rock near the cabin, her notebook open. She was so focused on drawing columbine flowers that she didn't hear him coming. Instead of walking away, like he usually did when she was doing her own thing, he stopped to look at her sketch. "You've got a good eye," he said quietly, pointing at how she drew the light on the petals. "That's real truth on paper." Delilah's chest warmed at his kind words. Later that day, Gideon gave her some charcoal sticks from his workshop, wrapped in a cloth. "These might work better than your pencil," he said. That evening, by the fire, Delilah found her courage again. "Mr. Maddox," she said softly, "did you ever have kids of your own?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without looking up from the fire, he said one word. Once, that night, Delilah dreamed of a small church, its windows dark except for one flickering candle. A child sat, alone on a wooden bench, crying softly. The sound mixed with wind whistling through cracks in the walls. She woke with tears on her cheeks, not sure why. From her loft, she saw Gideon in his rocking chair by the fading fire, not sleeping, just staring at the embers. His shoulders looked heavy, like her question had stirred up old pain. Delilah realized trust was like the spring flowers outside, slow to grow, needing patience and care. 3 weeks passed like water in the mountain stream, steady and clear. Delilah woke earlier each day, her muscles used to the chores. She walked farther from the cabin, first to gather sticks, then to explore wildflower meadows on the mountainside. Her legs got stronger, and she breathed easier climbing hills. One warm afternoon, while checking the henhouse for eggs, she heard a noise. Near the corner, tangled in old twine, was a red-tailed hawk with a twisted wing. Its fierce eyes watched her, scared but bold. Delilah's heart hurt seeing it. Moving slowly, she took off her shawl and got close. "Easy now," she whispered, like she'd heard Gideon calm animals. The hawk stayed quiet as she wrapped it in her shawl, careful of its sharp beak and claws. It was lighter than she expected as she carried it to the porch. "Mr. Maddox?" she called, keeping her voice steady. "I need help." Gideon came out of his workshop, sawdust on his sleeve. His eyes widened at the hawk, but he didn't wait. "Bring it to the table," he said, grabbing supplies. They worked together to free the hawk from the twine. Gideon showed Delilah how to hold it still while he checked the wing. "Not broken," he said, "just strained and scratched." They cleaned it with water and herbs, then wrapped it with clean cloth strips. The hawk stayed calm, like it knew they were helping. When they were done, Delilah gently touched its sleek head. "You're like that bird," Gideon said quietly, his voice heavy. "Still got wings in you." Over the next few days, Delilah took care of the hawk, keeping it in a pen on the porch, where it could see the sky. She gave it water and bits of meat, watching it get stronger. Sometimes she caught Gideon watching her with an expression she couldn't figure out. When Miss Josie came for her regular visit, the hawk was starting to test its wing. Delilah was excited to show her, but she almost missed the worried glance. Between Josie and Gideon, after checking the hawk, Josie pulled Delilah aside while Gideon went to the goats. "Your dad's been talking in town," Josie said carefully, fiddling with her herb basket. "Saying bad things about why Gideon's keeping you here. Ugly lies no good person should repeat." Delilah's stomach twisted. She thought of Gideon's kindness, how he always gave her space, how he helped her grow. The idea of people thinking bad of him made her feel sick. When Josie left, the cabin felt heavy with silence. Gideon barely ate dinner, and the quiet stretched, like a shadow. Finally, by the low fire, he spoke. "You should know something," he said, staring at the flames. "A long time ago, before these mountains, I was a preacher in Kansas." He stopped, rubbing his face. "During the war, something awful happened. Something I couldn't—" His voice broke off. Delilah waited, but he didn't say more. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny stars. Gideon added a log and went to his room without another word, leaving Delilah with her thoughts and the soft hoot of an owl outside. Through the window, she saw the hawk in its pen, dark against the evening sky. Like her, it was healing slowly, getting ready for what was next. She wondered what pain Gideon carried, what made his shoulders slump when he thought no one saw. But she knew some hurts take time to heal, and some stories need patience to come. Out. 3 days after the hawk got hurt, Miss Josie's wagon rolled up again. Over mint tea on the porch, she smiled at Gideon. "Running Elk asked about you at the trading post," she said, watching him. "The summer gathering's tomorrow night. He hopes you'll come." Gideon's shoulders got stiff. He stared into his cup like it held answers. "Been a long time since I went," he said quietly. "All the more reason to go," Josie said, glancing at Delilah. The girl could learn something too. Running Elk's people are kind to folks who show respect. Delilah's heart beat faster. She'd seen Ute traders in town, but never talked to them. Her dad always pulled her away, saying mean things. Gideon thought for a long moment, then nodded. "We can go if Delilah wants." "I'd like to," Delilah said softly, surprised at her own quick answer. They spent the day getting ready. Gideon showed Delilah how to pack saddlebags with dried meat, cornbread, and small gifts of tobacco and coffee. He said guests never show up empty-handed. The next morning they left, before dawn. Delilah rode a gentle mare Gideon had taught her to handle, while he led on his strong horse. The trail twisted through aspen and pine trees, climbing high before dipping into hidden valleys. Delilah's legs hurt from the long ride, but she didn't complain. As the sun set, they heard drumbeats in the distance. Gideon led them into a valley where dozens of lodges stood in a circle. Firelight glowed between them, and the air smelled like cooking meat and wood smoke. Delilah felt nervous as they got off their horses. Kids ran by, laughing and pointing at them. Women in bright shawls stirred big pots over fires. An old man with long silver braids came up, smiling warmly. "Brother," he said, hugging Gideon, "it's been too long." "Too long, Running Elk," Gideon said, his voice thick. "Running." Elk turned to Delilah, his eyes kind. "Welcome, young one. You're safe here." He pointed to a group of women by a fire. "Maybe you can help with dinner. There are stories to hear there." Delilah looked at Gideon, who nodded. She went to the fire where a woman with laugh lines gave her a wooden spoon and showed her how to stir a thick stew. Another woman taught her the names of herbs, speaking slowly so Delilah could follow. As night fell, more people gathered. Kids played with painted stones, their laughter mixing with the drums. Elders told funny stories Delilah didn't fully understand. Young people danced in circles, their beaded clothes shining in the firelight. From the cooking fire, Delilah watched Gideon sitting with Running Elk and other older men. He didn't talk much, but he looked relaxed, nodding sometimes. No one here seemed scared of him. They treated him like family who'd finally come home. The woman next to her, Singing Bird, noticed Delilah watching. "Your father," she said, nodding toward Gideon. "He was a good friend to us before the big sadness." Delilah wanted to ask more, but Singing Bird's tone said it wasn't the time. Instead, she helped serve stew in wooden bowls, smiling at the thanks she got. As the moon rose, casting silver light through the trees, Delilah felt a peace she didn't know was possible. Among these people who welcomed strangers so warmly, she started to understand why Gideon chose the mountains. There was a simple, deep truth here she'd never found in town. At dawn, women singing woke Delilah as they made breakfast. Air smelled like coffee and wood smoke. After eating cornmeal mush with wild berries, Running Elk called Gideon and Delilah to sit near his lodge. He sat on a woven blanket, carefully preparing a long pipe. "Sit," he said, pointing to the blanket. "Share breath and stories with an old man." Delilah sat next to Gideon, watching Running Elk pack the pipe with tobacco. His movements were slow, like a prayer. He lit it with a twig from the fire and took a deep puff before passing it to Gideon. "The smoke carries our words to the Creator," Running Elk said to Delilah. "It makes a path for truth." He looked at her closely. "I see something in you, like embers waiting for a breeze." Gideon took his turn with the pipe, then gave it back. Running Elk nodded. "Your spirit," he said to Delilah, "is like the small fires we keep in winter, not burning bright yet, but warm, waiting. He said some musical Ute words, then translated, "Little fire who waits. That's your name with us." Delilah's eyes got teary. No one had ever given her a name so full of meaning. Running Elk turned to Gideon. "Brother, she should know. The truth you carry is heavy, but sharing makes it lighter." Gideon's face tightened with pain. He stared far off, his hands clenched. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Had a wife once," he started. "Sarah Walking Star. Met her when I was preaching in Kansas. She was beautiful, smart, taught me more about God's love than any school." Delilah sat still, barely breathing. Gideon had never shared like this. "We had a son," he went on. "Joseph. Had his mama's eyes, my stubborn chin." A tiny smile appeared, then faded. "During the war, things got bad. Raids, burning, people picking sides, seeing enemies everywhere." Running Elk nodded sadly. "Dark times. Brother against brother, white against Indian. No one safe. Sarah and Joseph were at a church in town one Sunday," Gideon said, his voice breaking. "I was supposed to be there, but I stayed to help a sick neighbor. Raiders came. Thought the church was hiding enemies because it welcomed Indians." He closed his eyes. "They locked the doors, set it on fire." Delilah gasped, tears streaming down her face. 23 people died," Gideon whispered. "My family was in there. I couldn't preach after that. Words turned to dust in my mouth. Came to these mountains to get away, maybe to die. But God wouldn't let me." Running Elk put a hand on Gideon's shoulder. "The Creator gives us grief to teach us kindness. You've learned well, brother." They sat quietly as the camp went on around them. Kids playing, women working, men tending horses. Life kept moving. That night, after the fires died down, Delilah knelt by her bedroll. The stars seemed brighter in the valley. She prayed out, loud for the first time since leaving home. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "thank you for bringing me here, for showing me love can grow in broken places." She thought of Gideon's loss and his quiet kindness. "Help me be worthy of my new name. Help me shine without being afraid." Nearby, Gideon shifted in his sleep, mumbling something like, "Amen." The ride back from the Ute gathering was slow, with summer heat making the horses and riders sluggish. Delilah thought about the stories from the fires, Running Elk's wisdom, and Gideon's painful truth. By late afternoon, the cabin came into view. But something was wrong. Gideon stopped his horse suddenly. A piece of paper was nailed to the porch post, fluttering in the breeze. "Stay here," he said, getting off to check. Delilah watched him, his shoulders tense. He pulled the paper down, read it, and his jaw tightened. He handed it to her without a word. It was a telegram, short but clear. "Jed Boone, arriving next week, demands return of daughter. Sheriff Wells." Delilah's hands shook. The peace she'd found felt fragile, like morning frost. "I won't go back," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't," Gideon nodded. "You won't." That evening, Gideon sat on the porch, sharpening his axe. The steady scrape of stone on steel filled the air. Delilah watched from the window as she washed dishes, knowing it meant he was preparing, protecting, promising. They got up early the next day, doing chores with focus. Delilah swept the cabin and put fresh wildflowers in a tin can. Gideon checked the wagon wheels and cleaned his rifle. They were ready when Miss Josie's mule bells jingled up the trail. Josie brought supplies, but also a newspaper. "Thought you'd want this," she said, handing it to Gideon. "Page 3, bottom right." Gideon read aloud, his voice softening. "The mountain preacher and the girl he redeemed." The article told of a man who lost everything but found purpose, saving others, and a girl thrown away who found her worth in the mountains. It spoke of healing, dignity, and God's quiet work. When he finished, Gideon looked at Delilah. She twisted her apron. "I wrote it," she said, "as Mary Grace. I sent it last time Josie came. People needed the truth before Pa comes." Josie smiled. "It's good writing. Folks in town are talking. Changes the story, doesn't it?" Gideon folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "As long as it's true," he said. "Every word," Delilah said. They unloaded Josie's supplies: beans, coffee, sugar, bullets, and medicine. Josie brought extra, knowing trouble might come. Your Pa won't come alone, she warned. He's got people believing his lies about stolen daughters and mountain men. Let him come, Gideon said calmly. Truth holds its ground. Delilah watched Josie leave, then looked at the cabin, her home now. The sun lit up the clean porch, the neat woodpile, the garden rose. Everything showed care and belonging. She sat on the porch steps with her drawing paper and charcoal. While Gideon worked in the barn, she sketched the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, wildflowers swaying. At the bottom she wrote, "Home is where healing begins." Gideon's axe rang out from behind the cabin, steady and strong. The next morning, dust clouds rose on the trail. Delilah saw them from the garden, where she was picking beans. Her basket fell as her hands froze. "They're coming," she called, her voice shaky. Gideon came out of the barn, wiping his hands. Miss Josie, who'd stayed to help, stepped onto the porch with her medicine bag. 2 riders appeared, then a wagon. Delilah's heart sank as she saw her dad's stiff posture and the sheriff's badge glinting in the sun. Jed jumped off his horse before it stopped. Behind him, Sheriff Mills got off slower, his badge crooked, his eyes sharp with something mean. "There's my rotten girl," Jed spat, storming toward Delilah. "Living wrong with a mountain hermit." Gideon stepped in front of her. "She's safe here. No wrong, no harm." Sheriff Mills pulled out a paper. "Got proof saying different? Says you took her illegally. Says you're keeping her wrong. That's a lie." Delilah stepped forward, her face hot with anger. "He saved me when you sold me, Pa, like I was just cattle." Jed's hand slapped her face hard, the sound echoing. Delilah stumbled, holding her cheek. Miss Josie rushed to her as Gideon's fists clenched. "Don't touch her again," Gideon growled, holding himself back. The sheriff smirked, waving his papers. "These say she's underage. Say her pa never agreed to give her up. That makes you a kidnapper, Maddox." "Those papers are fake," Josie said, her arm around Delilah. "Half the town saw Jed sell his own daughter. I'll tell any court. A midwife's word against legal papers?" The sheriff laughed. "That won't." "Hold up, ma'am." Movement in the trees made them look. Running Elk walked out, his presence strong and calm. "These mountains are treaty lands," he said clearly. "Your valley laws don't work here." Sheriff Mills's face turned red. "Now, Indian, I see clearly," Running Elk cut in. "I see a father who throws away his child, a lawman who twists truth for money, and a good man who gives shelter to the hurt." Jed stepped closer, hand near his gun. "This ain't your business." "All injustice is my business," Running Elk said. "These slopes have seen too many broken promises." The sheriff lost his temper, pulling his pistol and pointing it at Running Elk. Then Gideon. "Enough talk, Maddox. You're under arrest for kidnapping and bad behavior. The girl goes with her pa." "No!" Delilah tried to run to Gideon, but Jed grabbed her arm hard. The sheriff moved with handcuffs as Gideon stood still, his eyes on Delilah. He didn't fight as the cuffs clicked on his wrists. "Get in the wagon, girl," Jed ordered, shoving her toward his rig. "This isn't right," Josie said, but the sheriff's deputy aimed his rifle at anyone who might stop them. Delilah cried as she was forced into the wagon. She watched the sheriff tie Gideon to his horse. "The truth will come out," Gideon called to her, his voice strong. "Stay strong, child." Running Elk raised his hand. "We won't forget," he said as Josie nodded. The wagon jolted down the trail toward Whetstone. Delilah looked back through tears, watching the cabin, her place of peace, fade into the mist. Ahead was the town jail for Gideon and her dad's ranch, where old Hertz waited. The last thing she saw before the trail turned was Miss Josie and Running Elk, standing like guards in the yard, their faces set with determination. She wasn't alone in this fight. The bunkhouse was the same. Rough wood, musty straw bed, small window with iron bars her dad put up years ago to keep her from sneaking out. Delilah curled up on the thin blanket as night fell. The lock clicked, loudly. Sleep came in bits, broken by coyote howls and the heavy feeling in her stomach. At dawn, boots stomped on the porch and keys rattled. "Get ready," Jed ordered, tossing a new dress through the door. Church in an hour. The dress was stiff and too small, clearly not for her. Delilah struggled with the buttons, her fingers shaking. Through the window, she saw ranch hands stop their chores to whisper and stare. The wagon ride to town was quiet. Jed sat straight, his Sunday suit perfect, while Delilah sat uncomfortably beside him. At the white church, Widow Margaret Prescott stood by the steps in a fancy silk dress. Her eyes narrowed as they came near. "Why, Jed Boone?" Margaret called, her voice sweet but sharp. "How nice you brought your dear girl back to church." Jed helped Margaret into the wagon like she was royalty. "The Lord works in strange ways, Margaret. Sometimes trials bring us home." Delilah's face burned as they walked into church, Jed making sure they sat in the third pew where everyone could see. Whispers spread like dry leaves. She heard bits: mountain man, scandal, poor Jed Boone. The preacher's sermon felt like it was about her, talking about lost kids and the dangers of straying. Delilah stared at her lap, twisting her dress, refusing to cry. Just as the last hymn started, the church door creaked. Miss Josie walked in, straight and tall. Behind her was running Elk, causing a wave of shocked whispers. But Delilah's heart jumped when she saw who else came. Tom Wheeler from the general store, Sarah Mills from the boarding house, and 3 others who saw her dad sell her that spring day. They sat in the back pew, their presence changing the air. Tom Wheeler's voice cut through a pause in the singing. "Ain't right. Selling your own kid, then calling it theft." More whispers spread. "Different now. I remember that day. Called her unfit. Traded her for flour and a rifle." Jed's face got dark. He grabbed Delilah's arm as they left church, hurrying her to the wagon, but Widow Prescott held back, looking troubled as Miss Josie came near. "Margaret," Josie said quietly, "can we talk about Delilah?" Margaret's eyes flicked between Jed and Josie. "Maybe we should discuss this properly." "There's nothing to discuss," Jed snapped. But Margaret stood taller. "I think there is, Mr. Boone," she said coolly, "especially if what I hear about a public sale is true." That evening, soft footsteps came to the bunkhouse. A key turned, not Jed's. Miss Josie's face appeared. "Quick, child," she whispered. "We're getting you somewhere safe until the hearing." They slipped through the dark to where Widow Talland, the church pianist's quiet sister, waited with a wagon hidden behind the barn. She helped Delilah up, covering her with a quilt. "Days," Josie said as they drove off. "The judge will hear everything then. Running Elk's gone to get Gideon from jail. Your pa has friends in the valley, but we've got truth." Widow Talon's house was at the edge of town, its windows glowing warmly. Inside, she spoke softly. "Your room's upstairs, dear. No locked doors here." Delilah climbed the stairs to find a real bed with a clean quilt, a wash basin with fresh water, and a desk by the window. On the desk were her drawing papers and charcoal from the cabin, somehow saved and brought here. She touched them, remembering peaceful mountain mornings when Gideon encouraged her art. 2 days until the hearing. 2 days to find the courage to speak her truth, not just draw it quietly. Town hall's benches creaked under the crowd. Half of Whetstone was there. Dust floated in the sunlight, coming through high windows. Delilah sat straight between Miss Josie and Widow Talland, her hands tight in her lap to stop them shaking. Judge Harrison, a serious man with gray hair, banged his gavel 3 times. The sound sharp like gunshots. "This court will hear the custody fight between Jed Boone and Gideon Maddox over Delilah Boone," he said loudly. "Sheriff Cole, show your evidence." The Valley Sheriff strutted up holding a leather folder. "Your Honor, I've got papers proving Mr. Boone never legally gave up his daughter." He spread the papers on the judge's desk with a flourish. "These show he's still her guardian and can take her back." Delilah's heart sank as the judge looked at the papers, but Miss Josie squeezed her hand and stood. "Your Honor, here's last week's town newspaper," she said clearly, handing it over. "It has an article by Delilah under a pen name about the public sale on the general store steps this spring." Tom Wheeler stood up. "I saw that sale, Your Honor. Jed Boone traded his daughter for a rifle and 3 bags of flour. Called her unfit for ranch life, made a big show of it." Sarah Mills and 2 others nodded, agreeing with Tom. Whispers spread through the crowd. Jed's face got red. That wasn't a real sale, just a lesson to scare some sense into a bad. Kid? A lesson? Widow Talon's quiet voice cut through. She stood slowly, her black dress rustling. Mr. Boone, I've seen you shame your daughter in church, lock her up like an animal. What lesson is that but cruelty? Her words hit hard. Some women in the crowd nodded, and even the judge looked different. Before Jed could answer, running, Elk stepped up holding a leather tube. I bring treaty papers, he said clearly, unrolling them. Signed by the governor and tribal council. Gideon's land is protected territory. Jed's cattle grazing rights don't count there. He has no power over that mountain or anyone on it. The judge studied the maps and signatures closely. Sheriff Cole shifted, his papers looking weak now. Also, Running Elk said, Gideon Maddox is a man of honor to our people. He was married to my sister's daughter before the war took them. He has the right to live there and help those in need. Delilah didn't know about Running Elk's connection to Gideon's wife. Her heart hurt as Gideon bowed his head. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Boone, these treaty papers cancel any claim you have on Mr. Maddox's land or his right to give shelter there. He looked over his glasses. And all these witnesses to a public sale, whatever you meant by it, raise big questions about you being a fit parent. Jed jumped up. You can't believe these. I can and do, the judge snapped, especially with testimony from respected people here. He nodded at Widow Talon and Miss Josie. The evidence of you mistreating your daughter is strong. The room went quiet as the judge sorted his papers. Delilah felt everyone's eyes, but now they were kind, not judging. This court finds Jed Boone gave up his parental rights by selling his daughter and abandoning her, the judge said. His grazing claims are invalid. He can't challenge Mr. Maddox's custody. He looked at Delilah. Young lady, you can choose your own path now. The gavel banged. Jed stormed out, leaving only the sound of his boots and crowd whispers. Delilah sat still, tears falling as Miss Josie hugged her tightly. That afternoon, the crowd stood outside as Judge Harrison gave his final ruling from the courthouse steps. For public endangerment and false testimony, he said, Jed Boone is fined $500 and must leave Whetstone by tomorrow night. He turned to Sheriff Cole, who'd taken off his badge. And you're suspended for abusing power and faking documents. The sheriff's face turned red as he backed away. Whispers spread as both men left in different directions, their boots loud on the wood. Inside the jail, Gideon sat quietly as Miss Josie came with the keys. Time to go home, she said softly, unlocking his cell. Gideon stood slowly, fixing his worn jacket. Thank you, he said, his eyes full of gratitude. The late afternoon sun made the church walls glow as Gideon walked down the street. His steps were steady, but his heart raced when he saw Delilah waiting on the church steps with Miss Josie. Both women smiled with relief. Gideon stopped at the bottom step and held out his hand, letting Delilah choose. She didn't wait. She ran down and hugged him tight, her face against his chest. You're the only dad I want, she whispered. Gideon froze, then hugged her back, his throat tight. He rested his chin on her head. Miss Josie wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. The ride back to the cabin was calm. The summer evening felt warm and soft as their horses climbed the familiar trail. The cabin waited just as they left it. While Gideon took care of the horses, Delilah checked on the hawk. Her steps slowed as she saw it lying still in its nest, head tucked under its wing like it was sleeping, but she knew it was gone. Gideon, she called softly. He came and stood beside her, looking at the hawk. They carried it to a quiet spot by the garden where wildflowers grew. Gideon dug a small grave, and Delilah laid flowers over it. The sun set as they stood by the fresh dirt. You set it free, Gideon said, his voice rough. Delilah looked at him, understanding. It set me free too, she said. She took his hand, and he held it without pausing. They stood as stars appeared. A father and daughter not by blood, but by choice, their shadows blending in the dusk. The air smelled of pine and summer flowers, and a whippoorwill sang in the distance. Miss Josie once said healing comes like spring after winter. Standing with Gideon, Delilah felt that truth deep inside. The hawk never fully fixed its wing, but it knew kindness in its last days. That, she realized, was the greatest freedom. The cabin windows glowed warmly as night fell. Inside, the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs felt like a hug. Gideon built up the fire while Delilah made tea, their movements smoothed together after months of living side by side. They sat quietly, watching the flames. The locked trunk was still in the loft, but its secrets didn't feel like walls anymore. Whatever sadness it held was in the past. They'd built something new, a family made of understanding, mercy, and grace. Late August brought cooler mornings. Delilah sat on the porch, setting up wooden benches in a half circle as the sun rose. She smoothed her apron and checked her slate board, nervous but excited. "They'll be here soon," Gideon said, pausing his work on a new chicken coop. His hammer had been banging all week, like a heartbeat in the yard. First came Tommy Fletcher, age 8, pulling his little sister Sarah up the path. Their mom followed with a basket of fresh bread. More families arrived, the Hendersons with 3 kids, the Williams twins, and 2 Ute families from the summer gathering. "Welcome," Delilah called, her voice strong. "Find a seat." Miss Josie showed up, her mule carrying books and supplies. She unpacked primers, chalk, and paper. The kids sat on the benches, eyes bright, watching Delilah write her name on the slate. "Let's start with letters," she said, smiling at the youngest. "English and Ute, okay?" Running Elk came during the alphabet lesson, holding a leather book with beadwork. He waited until the kids finished, then approached. "This was my grandmother's," he said, giving it to Delilah. "Stories of our people in both languages. The kids should learn both." Delilah took it, hands shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, touching the beaded cover. "I'll take good care of it." The morning flew by with lessons. Delilah found teaching easy. She was patient with slow learners and kind to the shy ones. When Sarah struggled with letters, Delilah showed her how to draw them in the dirt, making it fun. Gideon watched from the chicken coop, his hands busy but his eyes on Delilah's teaching. He'd cleared space for a new herb garden. The smell of fresh dirt mixing with the mountain air. At noon, while the kids ate under a pine tree, Miss Josie handed Delilah an envelope. "From Denver," she said with a smile. "The newspaper editor loved your first story." Delilah's hands shook as she read, "Dear Miss Boone, your article, Mountain Mercy, touched many hearts. We'd love more stories from you. Please consider." Writing regularly, she held the letter close, looking at the porch-turned schoolyard. Sarah shared her biscuit with Standing Cloud, a Ute girl. Tommy taught John, Running Elk's son, to whistle with a grass blade. The kids' worlds mixed in the joy of friendship. That evening, after everyone left, Delilah sat at the table with her charcoal and paper. She drew the kids' faces, Standing Cloud's hair in the sunlight, Tommy's big grin. Gideon came in. From the coop, washing up, the cabin smelled of pine smoke, fresh bread, and herbs drying above. "Found your calling?" he asked softly, looking at her drawings. Delilah nodded, adding a detail to Standing Cloud's smile. "The kids don't see differences," she said, "just friends." "They haven't learned hate yet," Gideon said. "Maybe your teaching will keep it that way." Laughter from the day echoed in the cabin, filling old shadows. Delilah looked at Gideon, her real dad now, and saw peace in his eyes, matching hers. The next morning's lessons would bring new stories, words, and connections. But for now, Delilah sat in the quiet evening, drawing the future she could see, one child's smile at a time. The first snow fell softly outside the cabin windows. Delilah sat in her favorite chair, made by Gideon from aspen wood, with a leather journal open. The lamplight glowed on the pages as she read aloud, her voice clear in the calm evening. "The mountain teaches patience," she read. "It shows us how to wait through storms, bend without breaking, grow strong in rocky ground. Like aspens sharing roots underground, we learn no one is truly alone." Gideon sat by the fire, hands folded. The flames lit his face, his eyes soft as he listened. His boots were off, socks stretched toward the warmth. A half-finished wooden toy horse sat on the table, a Christmas gift for Sarah Fletcher. Delilah kept reading, Her writing's stronger now, just like her. The Denver newspaper published her stories regularly, tales of mountain life and healing that reached far beyond their valley. "We measure time differently here," she read. "Not by town clocks or church bells, but by seasons, the sun's path, the thrush's evening song. Time enough for wounds to heal, trust to grow, love to find its way home." Snow fell thicker, dusting the window ledges. Dried herbs hung in the corner, some for healing, some for cooking, all gathered by their hands together. The cabin smelled of pine, warm bread, and coffee Gideon made after dinner. When Delilah finished, she looked up to see Gideon watching with quiet pride. "It's good," he said. "It's honest." His words meant everything. Honesty had built their home, truth by truth, until it became a safe place. Delilah looked out at the snow. The flakes danced in the dark, catching the light. "We made it," she whispered to herself. Gideon heard, like always. Outside, the empty. Hawk perch swayed in the wind, a reminder of another soul that found healing here. The hawk taught her about patience, trust, and knowing when to let go. The fire popped, sending up sparks. Delilah opened her private journal, where she wrote her thoughts and prayers each night. She dipped her pen in ink and wrote about the kids learning, Miss Josie's visits, running elk stories, and Gideon teaching her to chop wood, read clouds, and find peace in quiet. She wrote the truth growing in her heart like an aspen. He didn't buy me. He brought me home. Gideon stood, his joints creaking like the floor. He added a log to the fire, then rested his hand on Delilah's shoulder. Months ago, that would have scared her, but now it felt normal as breathing. They sat quietly, watching snow cover the day's footprints. The hearth glowed with hope, and two once broken hearts beat strong together, whole again, not despite their scars, but because of them. Each crack was filled with trust, truth, and love that chose to stay every day. Outside, winter blanketed the mountain. Inside, father and daughter shared the peace they'd built, word by word, day by day, until home meant belonging to each other. Thanks for listening. Stories connect us in surprising ways. If you felt something today, stick around. I share a new one every day, and the next might brighten your day.